All right, welcome to the Lowdown with Tony Lowe. This is episode 14 with my very special guest and wonderful friend, Amjad Doumani. How are you today, sir?
I'm fine, Tony. It's a beautiful Sunday. I'm sitting here out of the sun in my living room, and I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in the Lowdown. I'm glad to be your guest, and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Amjad is, for the viewer, listener, whatever. By the way, everyone, click like and subscribe, please. And Amjad is one of my favorite record salesmen, magnates, record shop owners online with B-Bop Records. There's actually a lot that Amjad and I could talk about that is a little more political, and I think both of us are wanting to be refreshed and rejuvenated with a talk about music and such as well today. So we're going to talk about some good old, well, I was going to say rock and roll, but we'll probably talk about a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So Amjad's been an online proprietor for a long time, which probably means that the COVID-19 problem hasn't hurt you as badly. Is that true, or am I off?
It's a good question because initially when, I don't want to say when COVID-19 started, but when the state of Ohio and the federal government kind of like admitted that there was such a thing as COVID-19, that was kind of in the middle of March.
Yeah.
And at that time, different states, around that period started issuing shelter-in-place orders.
Yeah.
And so in Ohio and throughout the country, that was done in the middle of March. And in the middle of March, all of a sudden, my mail order business just went dry completely. Like, not a single sale was happening.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, crap, is this going to be the way it's going to be from now on? Nobody knew how things were going to continue. But what happened was, for 7 days, I did not get a single order. So I was a little worried. But then things started to pick up after that, and then went back to normal pretty quickly. And then, like a couple of weeks later, it started actually going up and increasing dramatically. And I think what was happening was, yes, because I'm a mail order business and because people were all of a sudden home in front of their computers and they couldn't go out shopping in the real world, and they wanted to get their fix, whether it was, for people who love music, buying records and CDs, it was online. And my business actually did increase quite a bit because of it. So I'm happy about that. And that happened for about a month and a half, where that was quite a welcome increase in business. And now it's tapered off again. But it's back to normal. It hasn't stopped. And so I do think that, in a short answer to your question, being a mail order business did bode well for me because for two reasons. One, people could still shop and I'm open regular hours 24/7. And second, I'm my own boss, and I've been my own boss for the last 35 years. So I didn't have to worry about somebody telling me you're laid off, or your hours are cut, or we could no longer use you, or the business is shutting down. So I was in a good place that way, fortunately.
Well, I will tell you, when I got my stimulus check, one of the first things I did is I made a list of businesses that I wanted to use the money to support that weren't Walmart and Amazon, and yours was on the list. And so I ordered one of my favorite albums, Lowell Fulson's Hung Down Head on chess.
Yeah, I remember you placing that order, and thank you very much.
Yeah, this has, it has a lot of great songs on it, including Reconsider Baby, but man, I like that song, Check Yourself. Check yourself, you don't know what you're doing.
Nothing like the blues, man. You know, this is in my blood. You know, B-Bop Records, even before the business started, that's all I wanted to do. I mean, you know, I guess a good place to start, maybe, even if you didn't ask a question, I'll tell you, it's, I remember the exact moment or a couple of moments that got me into music that led to where I am now.
Yeah, let's start with that. Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, I look at two different moments, and both happened in Lebanon, in Beirut, Lebanon. So I came in 1970, immigrated with my family. I was 12 years old at the time. So for you listeners, you can figure out my age. That's all right. I came with my mom and dad and two brothers from Beirut to the United States, to Toledo. And but prior to that, in Beirut, two things affected or two integral moments happened that really formed my love for music. One, on Christmas one year, I think I must have been maybe 6 years old or 7 years old, I received a portable plastic record player, you know, like the ones for kids.
Like the Fisher Price model.
Exactly, something like that. You know, what looked like almost like a lunchbox, but you open it up and there's a record player inside.
I remember that.
And yeah, and that was probably like 1967, you know, something like that. And I was, you know, 9 years old then, and or it could have been earlier, but anyway, I was in that around that age range, and I received some kids records, you know, like kind of like kids songs in Arabic, and some stories on 45s that were colored vinyl with picture sleeves, and I also a couple of singles. These were all 45s.
Yeah.
And a couple of singles that were by really well-known international singers from Lebanon, like Fairuz, which a lot of people don't know here. But regardless, I listened to those and I got into music. But my music knowledge was only like Lebanese Arabic music, you know. And then as I was getting older, like I was 10 years old, I had older cousins who were already in the late 60s, listening to rock and roll and music from the West. So they were playing the Beatles and Creedence Clearwater Revival and that kind of stuff. And I remember going, you know, to parties that they would have with my parents. And then they, you know, they didn't want to hang out with us, but I could hear the music. Yeah. I was much younger than them. And I said, I kind of dig this music, you know, but I didn't get into it too much to do anything about it. Then one day, and this is the moment that kind of developed my love for rock and roll and popular music. We were at a park, an outdoor park, just to go have a picnic and hang out. And in this park, there was a cafe. And there was a jukebox in the cafe. And in the jukebox, somebody played a song, and it was the song Summertime by Gershwin.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which many people have done, you know, many covers of. But the cover that I heard was by an R&B singer from the U.S. named Billy Stewart.
Oh, nice.
And it was that 45 was on the jukebox in Beirut, Lebanon. And, you know, the way it starts out is really amazing. And that beginning of that song just blew my mind. It went like this. Summertime, you know, and the way he did that, I thought, what the hell is that? I've never heard anything like that before in my whole life. Then the drums kicked in and the horns and his soulful vocals, and I said, I gotta play it again, you know, I gotta hear this. And from that day, I just said I fell in love with the music, and I got the song, and I never went back. You know, I started collecting 45s. And my next 45, I would always like get on my mother and my aunt to take me to the city to buy 45s.
Oh man, what a great story. That's so great. And that's in Lebanon too.
That's in Beirut. And when I immigrated here, I ended up coming to Toledo, and I had about a box of 10 to 15 45s that I brought with me that I had collected over there. And they're all like, you know, rock and roll artists or R&B, and they're all made in Lebanon, you know, but they're like CCR and Tommy Rowe and that Billy Stewart, and I still have those.
For anyone that doesn't know who might be watching this, this area, you know, mostly a little north of here, but also Toledo, where I am in Ohio currently, is, I think, the largest population outside of Lebanon itself of Lebanese people. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, that's fairly true. You know, the Toledo, Dearborn, Detroit area has a very high number of Arabs from different countries, but Lebanon and Syria figure highly in those figures.
And when you came here, how old were you when you arrived in the States?
I came, I was 12. I was 11 and 11 months. I turned 12 on the month that I came here.
Now, this is kind of a two-part question. Was there already at that time a large group of immigrants that you immediately fell in with culturally? How was the reception for your family when they arrived? That's kind of what I'm wondering.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you know, what brought us to Toledo was some relatives who knew some relatives who had been in the U.S. before, mm-hmm. in the Detroit area and surrounding area, and knew some people. Excuse me. And so they said, you know, my dad didn't have a job set up. We had not arranged anything in terms of schooling or work, anything. We came here just for an opportunity to start life over again.
Sure.
My dad was a manual laborer. He did not have a grade school or even a high school education. My dad is Palestinian, and he, as a young man or boy, had fought. He was living in Haifa, Palestine, and he was in World War II. He fought as a Palestinian with the Palestinian contingent in World War II on the Allied side.
Wow.
So a lot of people don't know that. They think Palestinians were aligned with Germany or something like that, and that was not true. Basically, Palestine at the time was a protectorate of the British Empire. So it was under mandate to Britain after World War I. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So my dad didn't have an education. He had become, when the Zionists from Europe ethnically cleansed the Palestinians out of Palestine and created the state of Israel, they had expelled about 800,000 Palestinians. And those 800,000 Palestinians, depending on where they lived in Palestine, emigrated to, were ethnically cleansed and exiled to different places. So since we were in Haifa, my dad was in Haifa. I wasn't born yet. This is in 48. My grandfather, with his family, including my father, ended up in Lebanon. So he met my mother there. They got married, and that's where I was born. And then we immigrated here. So my dad didn't have a regular job, so he had to start over again in the United States. So he came here and became a manual laborer. We did not really know anybody. So we got introduced to some people, and I met some Arab American families, and they had kids my age, but they were born here. They didn't speak Arabic, but their mother and father were Arabs, you know, whether they were Lebanese or Syrian. So I fell in with them, and we became friends. But then, you know, right after grade school, 2 years later, I was in high school, and I didn't really hang out with them anymore. I formed my own friends who were all Americans, and I never really formed any more friendships with Arabs. Only my parents did. So, you know, only later did I do that when I became a much older adult. So I don't really have a big connection to the Arabic community in terms of forming relationships from a young age.
Yeah. By the way, I have so many questions about this, but we're going to do a whole separate show where we talk about the plight of the Palestinian people, which I can definitely say publicly, I'm not a fan of genocide anywhere. So Godspeed Palestine, BDS, welcome to Tony Lowe show where we are not in bed with Israel.
Right.
I don't hate Israel. I just think that nobody gets to kill off entire groups of people. That's all.
Right.
It's real simple.
Yeah, we can definitely leave that for another show because that deserves a show all of its own.
Yes, it is. And in fact, I'm going to do 2 shows, one with you and one with a journalist friend who works regularly in the West Bank. So okay, let's cut to this chase then. You did arrive in the States, and do you remember? We already know you were in love with that music you heard. What were some of your early listening tastes? What was happening in Toledo in the area musically? You know, what were people listening to? What were you into? What was the culture like?
Yeah, well, that's another good question. People are a product of their environment. And I grew up, we moved to the north end of Toledo. That's where the majority of Arabs lived, mostly Syrian and Lebanese. There were 2 churches there that were predominantly, their congregation were Arabs, Lebanese, and Syrian. And but in the north end I went to LaGrange School, and later on in my high school days, LaGrange Elementary, and in high school I went to Woodward High School, the Woodward Polar Bears. And so from 1970 to 1976, when I graduated from high school, I lived in the north end. I lived right across from downtown, Cherry Street. I lived on near Michigan, Ontario, that area. Mm-hmm. And that area was mixed. There were Arab Americans, there were African Americans, there were Mexican Americans, there were white people. The one thing that they all had in common is that they were all working class. It was not the suburbs, not Maumee, not Sylvania or Perrysburg. It was working class factory people, which is where we could afford to live and where my dad was working in the factory. So I grew up in the projects, in the housing projects called the Northwood Apartments at the time. Later became Cherrywood Apartments and so on. And that was right across Cherry Street from the health department. So downtown was right next door. Yeah. So growing up in those apartments, I was around Black families and Mexican American families, and I was subject to their cultures as well. So I was listening to Sly and the Family Stone, and I was listening to the Blackbirds and CKLW, that radio station out of Canada, which all of us thought it came from Detroit because it was out of Windsor. Yeah. But Windsor and the Detroit market are one and the same because only the Detroit River separates them. Yeah. So
just if anyone's wondering, if I can add a little detail.
Yeah, sure.
Who's not familiar with Toledo, what Amjad is kind of describing is there was a history in Toledo of the working class being on a certain side of town, and Cherry Street and the Cherry Street Bridge a lot of time. Am I right about this? Kind of some of that. So Amjad's talking about growing up where the workers grew up, not the owners, if you will. And then with Windsor and Detroit, Windsor, Canada, and Detroit are right next door with again a bridge dividing them. So
right, and that's only 60 minutes north of Toledo, and that radio station CKLW had a huge influence on a lot of people, and I was one of them. The broadcast signal was so strong that it reached all the way from Windsor, Canada, clearly into Toledo and past Toledo. So but the cool thing about that station helped form my musical taste is that back then in the early 70s, stations were not like today where they specialized in one genre of music, whether it was classic rock or soul or everything now is segregated. Back then it was not. So you could hear Sly and the Family Stone, then you could hear Bob Seger, then you could hear Diana Ross and the Supremes, and you could hear, Chet and Jeremy, and, just all kinds of music, whether it was, bubblegum pop or funky music or soul or rock and roll. It was all being played on there.
Well, the DJs were independent, right? So if there was a radio station, a DJ could play, as long as the studio owner was cool, a DJ had a show. And that DJ would be dropping and spinning records that they wanted to play, or people would call in, they want to hear a thing. Now it's all owned and programmed by Clear Channel. The DJ is just in there to say, welcome to this station, and push a button,
Exactly. Yeah, DJs had a lot more leeway, a lot more freedom to play what they wanted. And it's not like that anymore. It's all corporate now and consolidated and privatized to the point where there's no creativity left.
That's right.
But that helped form my music. And then the people around me, would be hanging out in the summer after, when the school was not in session, and people would be driving by with their 8-tracks in their car. We had in-dash 8-tracks, and they'd be playing all kinds of funky music, and we would be listening Ohio Players, this and that. And then so my early formations were affected by that. And then lucky for me, I was very close to downtown, so I could walk. And right down Michigan Street, walking downtown, just about a 10-minute walk, was the Toledo Lucas County Public Library main branch.
A gorgeous thing.
A gorgeous thing and a beautiful place to go. And lo and behold, I walk in there one day. I'm all but 12 years old, and what's in their audiovisual department is quite a few racks of records, vinyl records, to borrow, to take out, So I started a new thing. And then we also had LaSalle's and Lamson's downtown, and what's the name? Woolworth, the store Woolworth. Wow. Those were all downtown department stores that had record departments in the stores.
Sure.
And you could go in there and buy records for $1 and $1.99. They were cutouts.
Oh, it's so great.
Yeah, records now that are worth in the hundreds of dollars if you can find them, because they were all cut out back then. So I started collecting records and borrowing records, and then one thing led to another, to the point that I developed a voracious appetite. I couldn't get enough. And those places were not enough. And, records cost money. I was a little kid. I couldn't afford to buy all the time. So what I ended up doing was I put an ad in the Toledo Blade.
Oh, wow.
And I said, wanted records. And people started calling me, and I started buying their collections.
That's the way
it was all just for me to listen to. I didn't have an intention of selling it or anything. But it got to the point where I bought so much and I listened to so much that a pile started growing of records that I didn't like. I said, well, I don't like this. So I put it aside. Well, what am I going to do with them? So one day I found out there were record conventions, and I started setting up at record conventions. And that's kind of how the bebop bug started.
By the way, Amjad still does those today.
Yeah.
and I should say that you are online with one heck of a good radio show.
Yeah. 5 years ago, a bunch of people got together. Kind of a little background is kind of important here. So B-Bop Records opened up in 1987 as a storefront, just a small 800 square foot place. And it was in business for 8 years. This is just kind of synopsis, the nutshell version. And for 8 years, we had a great store. We grew into a 4,000 square foot place and had live shows and all of that in the place. But then the market changed, and the record industry changed. Downloading became a thing, and then Best Buy and Media Play moved in and put a lot of record stores out of business. I was one of them. So after 8 years of being open, I shut the store down, and a year later, I started being online. But I never got it out of my system I missed the people, the camaraderie, the relationships that were built with my clients and customers. Not only did I develop friendships, but people depended on me like any good record store where they could go and people cared about their tastes and what they liked, and they're able to suggest things, and relationships were formed, important relationships. And so I missed that. So back in 2010, after basically close to 15 or more years of being online, I reopened the store again, this time downtown.
Right.
And I did the same thing, but it didn't translate into good living. I got it out of my system, but I continued doing the online. Now I'm just strictly online. But during that time when I was downtown, a bunch of us used the store and called it was B-Bop Records, but the place was a community center. It was Third Space, and it was a hub for artists and activists to congregate. And Third Space was a housing to the Green Party offices, as well as the Media Decompression Collective, kind of a film and documentary collective I helped start here in Toledo that showed films for free to the public.
Wow.
And at that time, people got together in a meeting there and decided, well, we should get a radio station. And at that time, the FCC had announced that it was offering some licenses of low power FM and you could apply to get a license. So these people got together. I was one of the facilitators of that. And we met and we applied and we got the license.
It's great.
And my interest in it was not only to get the license, but then to do my own radio show. I've always dreamt of, a way to share the music that I love that needs exposure to the rest of the public. So that happened about 5 years ago, but my radio show started about 2 years ago. And it's called Deep Mix Music and More, and it airs every Saturday on WAKT 106.1 FM. It's a low-power FM station, so only people around the transmitter in the Old South End can kind of get it. That will change eventually in the near future when they put up the antenna at a much higher spot.
Yeah.
It'll be able to go throughout the whole city, but for now, you can stream it online. Anybody in the world can get it at toledoradio.org. And there's quite a few good shows on there. One of them is mine, every Saturday from 7 to 10 p.m. So I love doing that show.
And Amjad is a real artist when it comes to putting together a playlist.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I appreciate you saying that and listening to the show, and it's a labor of love. I don't get paid for it. I just do it because I love music and I want to share it.
Well, I often am unable to, just because of timing or whatever, tune into the show, but I always get on and find out what the playlist was, because I always look through it and I say to myself, it never fails that it reminds me to listen to something. Like, oh yeah, that, and I'll put it on the next day,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll be inspired by your playlists to go the next day and listen to stuff. And because there's something about timeliness, choosing the right song at the right societal context, and just hearing a song on a certain day. Like we just agreed that, because I saw on your playlist, you were checking out Bill Withers live at Carnegie Hall. Of course, he just had a birthday, but it's also perfect for 4th of July. That concert was so special for that, I think. So
yeah.
What are some other good picks, like for such a pregnant time in America, for new ideas and vanquishing old myths, but also kind of redefining what it means for Americans to have freedoms and fighting and protecting those freedoms? People have differing opinions, but we all really want the same thing, which is love, and we want to participate in the American dream. Like, unfortunately, some folks don't include all the Americans in that vision, but what do you think? Like, what are some good listens for now, for these present times?
Well, obviously there's quite a bit that one could mention, and on the top of my head, the first artist to me that comes to mind, some your listeners may know, some may not. He's not a household name, but to me, he is the quintessential kind kind of biographer of U.S. history through music, and that's Gil Scott-Heron.
Oh, yeah.
Gil Scott-Heron is a poet, a writer. He's published 2 novels, but he's mostly known as a singer, songwriter, piano player, musical activist, you could say. His most famous song remains to this day, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." And a lot of people kind of pointed that as one of the beginning inspirations for the hip hop movement and rap music. It was released in 1971, but Gil Scott-Heron always in his music talked about real life, the real life of the African American the black story, no matter in how it was experienced, be it on the streets, in the cotton fields, in the jails, in the prisons, excuse me, drug wars, you name it, spoke of the Constitution. So if you look at his catalog and you listen to his albums, you could get a U.S. history from below, from a perspective of working class perspective. Yeah. Without reading any books, you could learn a million things. So anybody that's looking for somewhere to go to learn about people's history without reading a book, just through music, I think the place to start would be Gil Scott-Heron.
That's a great pick, and it's not too academic. You can just enjoy listening to it, and it's not gonna, it's not like, for a lot of people, I suppose, someone like Eric Dolphy is a challenge, but I think Gil Scott-Heron is an easy listen for most people.
Yeah, I mean, his music was a melting pot of, soul, R&B, jazz, funk, Caribbean music. I mean, he mixed it all, and it was definitely rhythmic, definitely engaging and melodic, heartfelt, and could get you, give you goosebumps and get you not only feeling something, but also thinking, could get you thinking, And he touched on a lot of things that people will not talk about, He spoke about how the Constitution, a noble piece of paper, but that it did not apply to Black people, He talked, and that song is called "Winter in America," mm-hmm. And he talked about the meltdown, the near meltdown of the Enrico Fermi plant, just 30 miles from Toledo, near Monroe, Michigan. Almost had a near meltdown, and he wrote a song called "We Almost Lost Detroit."
Wow.
He was one of the first artists to talk about apartheid in South Africa before it was cool, and before Stephen Van Zandt of the E Street Band got the Artists Against Apartheid to form and get everybody on board to do the boycott.
Before Lethal Weapon 2 came out.
Way before, So he was way ahead of the crowd and dealing with these subjects, and he would not get radio airplay, So I play him a lot on my show, and my show basically tries to expose artists that don't get exposure on radio shows very much, And I like to harken back to the days when radio stations, you could go to a radio show and you could hear rock and roll, jazz, blues, punk, reggae, soul music, classical, African, Arabic music, whatever, just music, just good music.
What's on your turntable at home? Like, I know, to me, if you're playing that much, putting those playlists together, is that just stuff that you're listening to, or what have you been spinning over there?
I'll show you. This is good. I was spinning this today.
Oh, I love that record.
Yeah. It's probably showing up backwards on your screen, or no?
No.
Okay.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's a beautiful record. I was listening to that, and plus I was also listening to this record.
Oh, that one I don't think I've heard Eno and Hyde together.
Yeah, it's a good record. And I listened to all kinds of stuff. I was listening to this.
Nice. The
You
Birth
know?
of Chicago.
Yeah, and that's Jeremy Lindsay, originally from Toledo with JT and the Clouds and the Rivermen. He was in the Rivermen.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Well,
So
there's another person in that band whose name I fear has fallen out of my skull, who has an excellent podcast as well.
oh, would that be Chris Merrill?
I think is he the one that does? I think it's Music Makers and Soul Shakers.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Well, in the band is Chris Merrill, Drew Lindsay, and Dan Abu Absi.
Let me see. I'm gonna find out because I feel bad now.
No worries.
While we're talking, I want to tell people the real thing.
Yeah. And
is there a man named Steve Dawson? Or wait a minute. Well, all right. I'm gonna pretend. Let's just say that there's an excellent podcast, and we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, people can figure it out.
Yeah, sorry.
And one last thing, I was listening to this as well.
Oh, wow. I don't know that one. I know Frank.
Neither do I. I just found out about it. You know, all these CDs that I showed you, I'm one of my hobbies is finding music to for me and to resell. You know, because I don't order from distributors. So when you're dealing in rare and collectible and used stuff, you buy people's collections, or you go to thrift stores, or you go to estate sales or whatever. So normally at thrift stores are slim pickings, but the other day I happened to be in one of the thrift stores, and I ended up finding 180 CDs.
Wow.
Yeah, and that rarely happens. But I found stuff like all those ones I showed you. I found at that CD store. I mean, at that thrift store. So
I've got to tell you this, Amjad, that Ry Cooder and Manuel Galban record, that first one you showed, for anyone that is only listening, it's called Mambo Sinuendo. And
yeah.
that I had already heard the Buena Vista Social Club, which was when Ry Cooder recorded some of the greats from Cuba. Then this was a follow-up that he did with the guitar player Manuel Galban. And of course, guitar music is deep in my heart. And that record lit a slow, smoldering fire in my heart that burned so hot that my girlfriend at the time and I ended up getting a flight to Cancun and skipping over to Cuba.
Wow.
And we stayed there with Cuban families. Just kind of, we showed up and wandered into the casas, and went and kind of hiked the Cuban countryside. And I met these fantastic tobacco farmers, and it was the most beautiful thing. And they're the kindest people. And the band, the Buena Vista Social Club band, plays all the time down there, various incarnations, whoever's alive, etc., and who has joined since. But we were in a small cafe, and I remember I was drinking a beer, whatever, I forget the beer that they all drink there. And we were down there for their celebration for, I think they celebrate on July 26th. It's their Cuban kind of Independence Day sort of event. And they were having a special celebration. I might be kind of a bad person for not knowing the details of it. All I know is it was a party, and they had some special Che Guevara cigars rolled by the popular Cuban cigar company. And so the Cubans were handing them out. And so my girl got up and was jamming with the people who were playing in this little cafe, because of course there's live music everywhere, all day, every day. People, playing the Cuban rhythms. And it's just a beautiful thing. So they're doing that, and she gets up and she's got the block and she's playing, trying her best to match the rhythms. Of course, coming a little short, but you know, they like her spirit. And I was kicking back with a cigar and this beer, and come to find out that these people just randomly playing in the cafe, two of them were in the Buena Vista band. They just happened, the guys, they just happened, I don't even know which ones, because I don't speak Spanish, you know, so I was totally confused, but I was able to put that much together.
Wow. That's one of these days, you should turn the tables around, and I should interview you just about that trip, and you could talk about it, you know. Sounds great.
Anytime, man. Amjad, I've got a million. You don't even know how many crazy stories I've got.
I bet. One of my bucket list things is to go to Cuba and just enjoy the people and the land, you know.
It's the only way. If anyone ever goes, first of all, it's heaven on earth. It is the most beautiful place. I've traveled a bunch of places, and it was by far my favorite. And the people they literally will walk you all the way across Cuba to show you something. You know, just like, oh, you're from the United States, let me show you something. And they walk for like half a day.
Wow.
Just so that you can see the sunset in the right place. I mean, they're just people who generally want to show off what they have.
Yeah.
And what they have is a world untouched. It's kind of this Garden of Eden kind of place where it doesn't compete in the American mind, because we want freedom in a certain kind of way, and we want to be able to buy things and luxury. But it's almost like, if you have none of that and you're truly living off the land, on one hand, you never get the creature comforts that we have here in the United States of America. You never have them, you never will, and you'll never even aspire to have them. You're not going to have a big flat screen TV and a bunch of, you're not going to have a bunch of options for where you can get this or that product or decorate or be in a fancy house or anything like that. It's not going to happen. What you do have is a world where you don't know what organic food is, because you don't have any other kind of thing.
Yeah.
And your food does grow there. I mean, when to see them every morning call to one of their pigs who come from the forest, they come from the wild to them, and walk calmly into town, go up on the rooftop of their home and humanely kill that animal and roast it on the roof all night, and the people in the area eat that pig for the next day, and that's the meat for the next day. And whatever vegetables have grown around locally is the rest of the meals. It's an amazing experience to live that close to your earth. And I remember we went on this very long hike, and they told us they would serve lunch at the end. And so we got up to this little place where, they had tables set up and a small grill. And I remember not really seeing anywhere where they had food. And I said, well, what is for lunch anyway? And the guy, the tour guide, the man we hiked with, he said, well, you'll just tell the gentleman and what you would like for lunch. And I said, okay, what's the menu? What are my options? And the man asked me what fish I wanted. I said, well, what fish do you have? And he didn't understand what I was talking about.
Right.
I said, well, what fish? You're asking what fish I want. What fish do you have? Even the idea that he has a fish is kind of out of his, he's like, so he eventually points at a small little brook thing that's right there near the tables. And I realized, oh, he means what fish do I want? Which fish that's swimming by?
Yeah.
So he grabs a net.
Yeah.
And he's like, point to a fish. So I'm like, that one. And he just like scoops it up and throws it on the grill.
Yeah. Well, that's the way it is in Lebanon, in Beirut even. I mean, you do go to a restaurant, and but you don't pick a name of a fish like halibut or whatever off the menu. they'll have fresh caught fish from the Mediterranean, and they'll put them in a tank, and you actually walk out of away from your table, go to the tank, and point to the fish that you want. I'll take that fish, you know.
Yeah, and it's amazing out there in Cuba. The casas, you know, you stay with the people. Never stay in a hotel. If you stay in a hotel, you have a whole different tourist experience of Cuba.
Right.
But you go and you stay in the casas because the government gives the people money to host guests. And if you do that, and you're willing to let go of the American tendency to want a trip agenda,
yeah,
what you do is you just crash it at a family's house. And it's like in the United States, we would associate it with like a bed and breakfast. But you can do it at any Cuban family will take you in. All you have to do is show up in Cuba and walk around, and they know right away you're an American. I mean, there's no
right.
So they just say, American. In other words, you need a place to stay, and you stay the night. They get a subsidy from the government anyway, and they serve you the most magnificent breakfasts. Usually they pick fruit from their own gardens to serve you in the morning. And of course, the amazing Cuban coffee. Usually it's eggs, some ham or pork, but it's a beautiful thing. And then that's how you see Cuba, because they tell you at 1 o'clock, if you're up on that hill, there will be a man, and his name is, and you talk to him, and he'll give you a ride up the hill, up to the top of the very, and you just go, and then you're in some other town and you find a new family, and it's just how you do it.
Wow, man, that must have been an amazing experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's what for my way of hallucinating my way through my time on Earth. That's the stuff you live for. We do all this other crap so that we can have these dramatic and gorgeous experiences that are sacred and untouchable. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I love traveling. And I did a fair share of it in my life, while I had B-Bop Records, and it became successful, and it afforded me the ability to take time off. I was my own boss, and I traveled, and I was single till late in life. I didn't get married till later, and I had my first children. I was 50 years old when they were born, so I didn't, I had children at a much later age, but I was living life kind of as a single person before that, which afforded me the trip. And I had similar experiences by traveling to Morocco and Spain, and I went to the USSR. Back then it was called the USSR. I've been all over Europe and the Middle East and stuff like that. And there's no better way to grow and kind of get the sense that the world is a much bigger place than you, and that you're just a single small part of it. And it affords you and gives you the necessary element to really take on life. And that is to know that there's always a bigger context than just what your needs are and what you feel. There's a bigger picture to look at. And that's a best way to look at the world, because then it's not all about you, but just that you fit. But that doesn't also discount who you are. I think this is the kind of what we're missing in U.S. culture and Western culture, is that we're so enamored and caught up with individuality and individualism, and what I need and what I want, and that I'm free to do whatever I want. That we never think about, well, what does the neighborhood want? What does society want? What does the nation want? What does it need? Not just what do I need, what do I want? What do I, so we need to balance the scales, where we, once you figure out that you are part of the whole, and you start considering the whole, it doesn't mean that you give up on what you also want. It just means when you look at what you want, you look at yourself as part of the whole. You don't just look at yourself isolated from the whole, you know? And so I think this is what we need as a culture to understand about life. And I think it would make us a lot healthier, because it would be easier for us to unite and fight the common enemy being corporatism and just fighting for the dollar and amassing all the material goods and power, instead of cultivating beauty, cultivating art, cultivating life, as the highest value of all things is life, and to live it. So, because I think a lot of the people that are in our country, in the United States, that are angry, that are unhappy, unsatisfied, they're working 2 or 3 jobs, everybody's working, they don't have enough time for family or the pursuit of happiness, they're having a hard time making ends meet, they're facing lots of health problems, the whole myriad of challenges and problems that we face. Those are not left and right issues. Those are problems that are faced by working class people, regardless of your thinking, in terms of politics, whether it's left or right. You could be a xenophobic, racist, white power nationalist, but still be unhappy because you can't make ends meet. You can't, you're living hand to mouth, but you take your anger out and your frustration out on people of color because that's what you've been conditioned to do by society. But
Yeah.
the people that are facing the same problems that are Black or minorities, they're facing the same problems. They're having a hard time making ends meet. They're having health problems. They don't eat good food. They can't afford it. So they have something in common, but they see themselves separate. The identities and what other people have called, and I agree, it's called identitarian politics, identity politics. They look at just the box that the societies put them in, or they put themselves in, and they say, I've got to work on making my place better. What they don't realize is that the place they're in is the place that a lot of people are in, but they don't know it. They don't know that they have that in common. So
yeah, well, Amjad, if the narrative keeps getting reinforced by the powerful, right, to maintain the culture war,
exactly,
then we can't come together to fight the class war.
Right, so, exactly.
And something else you said, culturally, the United States was colonized by Western Europeans, my ancestors. So a lot of times people forget that culture is formed and held because of what it took for that group of people to survive where they were. So my ancestors had to survive some very harsh winters and had to get very creative about how to master their terrain. And that became part of the identity of our culture, is that being having the ingenuity and developing technology that would help us master, so that we could have agriculture that would take advantage of in this rough terrain. So what happened is, when that society started to branch out and conquer other lands for more resources, because we didn't have them, starvation economy will do a lot to a group of people. We started to conquer and take, and when we did that, we were measuring the merits of other culture by the values that we held in our survival. So they're not mastering their terrain at all. In other words, they're living in harmony with their terrain, not trying to change the shape of the environment. They're trying to be part of their environment. We looked down upon that. Yeah. And we brought that thinking to the so-called new world.
Right.
And so what has happened is we continue to think that way. And it makes it very difficult to understand why some countries, we call them third world or developing nations, when in fact they're not less developed. Perhaps they're more developed in that they found a way to live without destroying their environment and killing themselves off. That would be a bonus. But we continue as Americans to have some cultural ideas around what makes a population successful at so-called evolution. And what happens when we travel to get to where I was going with all that, traveling to Cuba, as you say, when you go, you find some things out where it's like, oh, well, I can't have the quote freedoms that I have in the United States. But then there are some freedoms you do get to have.
Yeah.
In other words, you never have to worry about your education.
Right.
You never
Or your
have to
health.
worry about getting sick.
Yeah.
You never have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to meeting your basic needs, you're going to live a very humble life and you'll probably work hard and do physical labor. Guess what? It's not that bad.
No.
And the hospitals, it's not like what you imagine. It's not some hole in the ground hospital. They're better hospitals than what we have in a lot of places. And the doctors they're not gonna, you're not watching ads on your television for drugs, and your doctor isn't owned by a corporation like in Toledo. ProMedica is buying up every single hospital, and your doctor works for them, and they're gonna diagnose you with whatever and prescribe you whatever medicine the corporation says they need to sell more of, et cetera, et cetera. So there are freedoms that are gained. Now, I'm not a socialist. I'm a capitalist. Now, check this out, though. What the point you're making, the folks that are the right and the left, all of us want life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And let's assume that all Americans actually do want that for all Americans. If we're not afraid that someone else's freedom takes from our freedom, and we spread that evenly, I think we all really, in our heart of hearts, want that. And what the system we have in place and our beliefs that are reinforced by schooling, by television, by government propaganda, by everything, we don't realize that we're not necessarily operating in a free economic market. As long as trusts are not broken up, that companies are allowed to buy each other out, that we have like 6 corporations that are running the whole show, what music you hear on the radio, as we said, what medicines are available and pushed upon us. All of these freedoms are the ones, when you see men with guns marching into the Michigan state capitol, whatever, and demanding that they not be locked down, that's because they don't know that the government is just deciding not to cover the payroll like they did in most countries when they locked down people and said stay home because of the coronavirus. They just covered the payroll. Everybody, when this is over, they're going back to their old job. Here, you're lucky if you can even get on the unemployment website. Begging for minimum wage for a month. No, none of the families can support that. So yeah, you're going to have people saying, screw the virus, I'm going back to work, because that's the only way they know how to get their money for food.
Yeah.
You know, all of these things are not freedoms.
No. I mean, the narrative and the lexicon, the language that we use has been the language of the oppressor.
Yes.
So, when we talk about freedoms and when we talk about free market capitalism or free market, just free market, these are like freedom, free market. People think of these as positive terms, but really what they don't realize is that, well, what does that mean? Well, freedom means what your freedom of choice to do whatever you want at any time that you want. well, no, it doesn't mean that, but just by itself, it means that nobody's oppressing you and making you do things on your own, but that you then have a responsibility, if you're free to, since you are free, to know what that responsibility is to society and to your family and to yourself as a whole. Not to just free to do whatever you want and fuck everybody else.
Well, that's it. Everybody wants freedom, but nobody wants to be held accountable for making choices.
Exactly. So, and that's not freedom. And then sometimes the irony is that people that you may look at as your enemy or disagree with you, they know that too. They'll say, well, freedom is not free. But their idea of freedom is not free is that, well, our soldiers went to Iraq and our soldiers went in World War II and our soldiers went to Vietnam and died for your freedom. So you can't be criticizing the government because without these soldiers, don't criticize the wars, because without them soldiers, you wouldn't be out here and able to voice your opinion. And that's not really the definition of freedom either, So the narrative everything has to be deconstructed again. And the words have to be redefined to really mean what they're supposed to mean, not to mean what they've told us to mean. Freedom isn't fireworks and celebrating your America and having the freedom to go buy any luxury car you want every 5 years,
Right.
I think that your experience in Cuba is an amazing experience that every American should have, and every American should travel just somewhere that's not the United States, so they can see how other people live. And the analogy between Cuba and the U.S. can be made now in terms of the coronavirus. Cuba, after Fidel Castro threw out all the corporations and the plantation owners who were based in Miami in the U.S., and threw them out and brought power to the people and redistributed the land and so forth. America did its best to make life miserable for all the Cubans. They boycotted. They would not allow any trade. They almost bombed it, whatever. So Cuba has had to, by no choice of their own, rely heavily on whatever resources they had there. They could no longer import cars or parts for cars. So what they found is that, it's not easy, but we can do it. And when we do it and are able to do it, then man, it's such a great feeling of liberation because we figured out how to keep it going.
They're living under socialism. They're living a libertarian's dream. Every man, woman, and child down there is taking care of themselves, unless they get sick or they want to read a book. All that's made available to them by their government. But in terms of vehicles and everything, they're still repurposing. I'd say it was about half, old 50s classic American cars, and the other half was kind of like 70s Japanese cars.
Yeah.
But they were maintaining them and building their own parts and doing everything themselves, growing their own food on their own land. It was like a libertarian's paradise. But
and they have renewable resources. They have their own energy.
Yeah.
They have great doctors. They export doctors and to the world.
Oh yeah. Their doctors are incredible.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Sorry to interrupt you. If you're an American and your idea of your perfect life, you're totally committed to hunkering down in a large house with a car and really comfortable air conditioning and perfect, plumbing and a bidet and a toaster and everything that makes life really cozy. I will acknowledge right now, you will hate Cuba. You would hate it.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're never going to have those things. But if you love just living off the land and your home is open to a lot of air and you're close to wildlife and picking your own food and doing your own chores and you don't mind manual labor and farming life, it could be a heaven.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting is that that's correct. And what's interesting is that people here in the United States will say, well, I have to work hard and I have to work 80 hours a week or 60 or 40, whatever it is. And just so I can have enough money to then go and live like the Cubans. So I'm going to go camping and build build a fire and toast my own food and maybe go hunting and catch a fish and cook it out there on the fire. Well, I mean, the Cubans and other cultures are living that way daily on a day-to-day basis. You know, and this is what you're working your indentured slavery job in order to save money so you can go there and live that way. And at the same time, you're criticizing them for being socialists, you know?
And
so
what's
it's
amazing,
like,
they're chilling and they are getting more work done than we are. Like, what work do you get done sitting around punching numbers into an Excel spreadsheet and getting fat? And they're down there lean and mean and mobile and feeling groovy, and they don't have a bunch of health conditions and back problems, and you know, and they're farming with a couple of oxen and a plow, like literally not even a tractor. They're just like, yeah, why would I want to waste money on a tractor? I got this, you know, like it's awesome.
Yeah, it's rural and then you know, farming enough for you, not farming for a whole nation, you know.
There's no need to try to make a profit.
Right.
They're totally unconcerned with making a profit. They just want to make lunch.
Yeah. See, and that's the thing that I think that you know, definitions are important, and capitalism, when that word is used, it means different things to different people.
Fact.
But on a general sense, capitalism, basically, generally defined, is the ability to work, the ability to put in the effort to make money unhindered by any sort of constraint, you know. And some people will say, well, you know, I'm a capitalist, but I don't believe in runaway capitalism, you know, like it ran away from us and but see, I think in the nature of capitalism, it's really easy to run away because capitalism depends on dog eat dog, like just getting the pie before the other person does. Because socialism is the focus on centering what the needs of the society are, where society, socialism, that comes from there, the social network, you know. So what are the needs of society? Well, you know, the needs of society are to eat, have shelter, clean air, clean water, have some leisure time to enjoy with your family, create art and music to liven up your lives. Well, that doesn't preclude, you know, pressing records and selling records and having a record store and having a restaurant. It doesn't preclude any of that. That's all included in socialism, you know, manufacturing and pressing albums and making cars and all of that. But it's not making cars to sell as many units as you can so you can then increase the shares of your shareholders. It's selling cars to meet the demand of society for transportation or creating mass transportation or whatever. That's the difference. So I think when you have socialism versus capitalism, it's not, people think that under socialism, you're not going to have any of the cool stuff like, you know, entertainment or whatever. It's not true. It's just, you're not going to have it to just keep making money and then get to the top while everybody's at the bottom. You know?
Yeah, I mean, every time capitalism, the way I understand it, has succeeded in this nation, it was protected. Corporations first started to become a word and a thing all the way back under Andrew Jackson. And Teddy Roosevelt stepped up with the square deal and broke up the trusts, you know, broke up Carnegie and Standard Oil. And he said, look, man, if we're going to have a free market, you can't gang up on people. So there's always been government intervention to make competition possible for everyone. And I do believe in that. I believe that it's really cool if I come up with a great idea and I if I make a profit from that. I just draw the line at saying no one else can then compete with my idea. I want a better idea.
Yeah.
I want there to be enough to go around for everyone to be successful on their good ideas. You know?
Well, you as an artist, you're creating ideas all the time. I mean, your art, your music are your ideas. And the interesting thing about music is because of capitalism, musicians no longer can survive and make a living. And that's not just in the 2000s. I mean, it's even worse now because, you know, releasing records these days makes nobody any money except for the people that are pressing and releasing the labels that are maybe releasing the records, or the companies that are signed the artists.
If
But
they
the artists
are in
themselves,
business.
yeah, the artists themselves don't make any money. They have to tour, and now that's gone because of COVID-19. But you know, they had to tour and sell merchandise in order to make money, and even then it was hard. But the whole thing about art, I mean, why as people, regardless of whether we're artists or whether I know how to fix computers, you know, whatever your skill is, why do I have to constantly try to sell my skill as much as possible, day in and day out, and market myself in order to make enough money then to buy myself healthcare and food? Why can't I have universal healthcare and you know, society that has a good infrastructure of local farms or local agriculture that is feeding the whole community? And I participate by giving my skills for minimum fees, but I partake of everybody else's other skills. And then I don't have to work my ass off to the point where I'm tired just so I can afford to pay the doctor and I can afford to pay for the car. You know, I'm getting my mass transport. In other words, we should be able to create and not give it away for free, but give it away because everybody else is giving it everything else away. You know, not by giving it away, I mean sharing it. You know, I want to share with you what I have, and hopefully that you'll share with me what you have. You know, I need your skills in order to have a better life, and you need mine. So let's work together instead of like, I got to go work for man number 3 in order to make enough money to bring over to you to pay you, because society won't allow you to accept any other way of payment because you're in a lockdown where you're constricted. You have to pay somebody else for your care. So it's just a really weird system that's got everybody enslaved, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I want everybody to be able to, again, have freedom and liberty. And as you say, like, for using me as an example, I had health insurance when I got sick with type 1 diabetes when I was about 20. And my insurance, because the insurance companies are giant, powerful corporations, they kicked me off of my insurance. They found some contract loophole, and I could never have afforded the kind of lawyering it would have taken to defeat them in court.
Yeah.
So I had to stop being a musician. So I had to go figure out a way to be employed, because the only way to get healthcare was through an employer.
Yeah.
And that changed the entire course of my life. And to this day, people say, well, now we have Obamacare. But no, Obamacare it's still just buying at those inflated prices.
Yeah.
In the U.S. capitalist market. So there's only like 1 or 2 companies that make insulin, and they keep updating those patents.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody else can compete with them. And then the result is that a vial of insulin that costs $1 to make, and the patent, it was given away because the discoverer of insulin thought this will save the world. Everyone needs this. And gave it away. These companies took it, and now a vial of insulin, like for a month, for me is like hundreds of dollars. Then that gets billed to the insurance that I have to work at a certain kind of job to afford and buy.
Yeah.
And then so I have to work a certain kind of job so that I can be eligible to buy the expensive insurance. But then it's my insurance company that is another big corporation. They buy it at the high price. And so even if I have Obamacare that lets me jump into the market, guess what? If I don't work for a company that gets the price negotiated down for their workers, I can't afford to just buy it on the free market.
Right. Yeah, that's why people call it indentured slavery, you know. So, you know, it's interesting. So I think, you know, we're born and raised in this world. I mean, this system was there before you and I were born, and it was there when my children were born, and it will be there when their children were born, probably. And it's going to be a matter of time before things either the humans find a creative way to unite and change it and deconstruct it for something more positive and livable as a society, or it'll just self-explode and then self-implode upon itself. And then, you know, as human beings, will be a failure, a realized failure on this as a life form on this earth. And the planet will be, this biosphere will be glad to get rid of us because we're trying to destroy it. However it works, regardless of what happens, you know, many of us realize, like you and I, you know, we know that we are born into this and that it is a problem and that we need to do whatever we can to understand it and change it. But we also realize that while it may be hard and while it may seem undoable and a challenge too large to surmount, that life still exists and is incumbent upon us to find and create beauty within the world in order to make life livable and enjoyable along with the struggles that we face, you know? And this is what I've tried to do with everything that I've done with B-Bop Records, you know? I'm not a musician myself, even though 5 years ago I started playing piano and I improvise and I enjoy doing it. And last night I got together with 3 other musicians that are all trained musicians, and we actually jammed and had a great jam, you know? But I wanted to always provide, to have music be the thing that bridges people together, that brings people together, and provide a platform for artists to share their music that most of the rest of society and the clubs or whatever did not care about giving them a platform, you know?
Right.
So I'm all for the underdog. And all grew out of me being an underdog myself, having a father who came from Palestine, who was ethnically cleansed and we became the underdog, the refugees. Then I came to the United States as an immigrant, and then I was picked on, called a camel jockey, a sand nigger, a towel head. I was picked on at school, slapped and beat up. I was picked on for fights just because I had a name like Amjad, you know, and I came from Lebanon. So I was the underdog. I always saw and cheered for the underdog. So it became part of my life. You know, I have what a lot of people will consider as white skin. I look white, but once you say my name, then you know I'm not from Europe, you know. So black and white is not, black and white is not so black and white, you know. There's a lot of gray areas. I have white privilege because when I go places, unless people hear my name, they just look at me as white, and I can pass for things that people with a dark skin won't pass for. You know, they'll have a hard time doing, like with the police or something. So I have white privilege, but I understand it, and I understand my privilege. And it's not, and race is a construct to begin with that was formed by the oppressor. But we have to deal with it because it's been imposed on us, and racism still exists. So we can't just ignore it and say, you know, oh, I'm colorblind. No, I'm not colorblind.
No, you're not.
I'm not colorblind. I'd like the world to be colorblind and end racism, but until that happens, you cannot be colorblind because you have to know that racism exists and you have to deal with it. Our problem in this country, and music is a good tool to try to eradicate this, and that is, we're conditioned by the powers that be to not learn our own history. And when our history is somehow exposed to us, our conditioning has allowed us to deny it. We're in denial that we ethnically cleansed the natives from here. We're in denial that we enslaved people. while we may know it in the back of our heads, we're in denial of admitting it, of behaving as if, yes, we did it, and we need to come to terms with that and address it. You know, we're in denial. We need to cross that Rubicon, you know?
Yeah.
And until we do that, it's going to be an uphill battle, you know?
Amjad, until we talk again about the Palestinian people and some political stuff that we need to get into, I'm wondering, because we have to wrap up pretty soon.
Sure.
We should tell people where to shop your store online, and maybe could you just for fun give us 5 great records that we should listen to? Just kind of name. It could be old, new, anything you want.
Yeah. Well, first of all, B-Bop Records has an online presence through Discogs. Are you familiar with Discog?
Sure.
Okay. So I don't know if you can pull it up on your screen or not, but regardless, if you go to Discogs or if you go to Google and just type in B-Bop Records, B-Bop is spelled B-B-O-P. There's no E in bebop. It's not the bebop term of jazz, but it's a B-B-O-P.
B-Bop.
Yeah, B-Bop Records. Type that in with the word Discogs and you'll get my website. So you can go there. You can check us out. I deal in a lot of rare and out of print and records, mainly vinyl, but I have quite a bit of CDs as well. But it's dealing with rare and hard to find stuff. And we have great customer service. We have a 99% positive feedback and a great overall selection of a wide variety of music.
I personally can vouch for this. If I'm shopping for a record, I'm definitely going there first, and I'm not making stuff up, you know.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, really do, and and I ship all over the world. So that's that. Now, in terms of records that people should listen to, you know, off the top of my head, I know I'm going to forget some, but I'm just going to pick some that just come right first to my mind. And those are records that have played kind of an integral part in my development, musical development, you know. And I'm just going to choose albums, not going to choose 45s or singles. I'm just going to choose whole album. Yeah. So number one, and they're not in any particular order, but number one, Gil Scott-Heron, Winter in America. That's the name of the record. Winter in America. Number two, The Gang of Four, Entertainment.
That's come up on this show before. The first, just really quick, the opening parts. Ba 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 ba. Yeah. Chicken it. I talked about it endlessly.
Yeah, exactly. And then number three was a big change in my life, was going to the downtown library and picking up a record just by the cover of it. It was Patti Smith, Horses, her first album. You know, that changed my life too.
Oh, love that record. Johnny gets up. He stands like
yeah.
They drove it. I love that record.
Yeah. And Sun Ra, Space is a Place.
Good pick.
And you know, and Roxy Music for Your Pleasure.
Okay. All right. You like Brian Ferry or more just Roxy Music straight?
You know, I have a love and hate relationship with Roxy Music. Roxy Music, the first 5 albums, they're like probably some of my top 10 favorite albums of all time in the rock genre, you know.
Wow, that's big talk.
Yeah. Now, after Siren, I don't really care for Roxy Music anymore. And Brian Ferry's solo career, I could take it or leave it. Probably mostly leave it.
I could leave it.
Yeah. You know, it's a crooner and more into this high production sound and all of that stuff. I like the raw stuff that comes right from the heart, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, Roxy Music there, but I mean, there's tons of great records, and I'm into all kinds of music, you know. But those are the first 5 that came to my mind.
Good 5. That's a good way to start.
Man. Yeah.
All right. Well,
it was. It was nice chatting with you, man. I thank you so much for inviting me to be on the Lowdown.
Yeah, well, yeah, no problem. Don't forget everybody to like and subscribe and buy something from Amjad. Gil Scott Heron seems like a good starting spot.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, we have a search service. If you don't find it, I can hunt it down for you. And I have thousands of records that I have not yet put up on my website. So I'm slowly putting them on every day. So I could have something that people are looking for that is not up there. So always ask.
Hey, while we're on, I've got a challenge for you if you want to search for something.
Okay.
There's
I'm
a
writing
record.
it down.
There's a record I look for all the time, but it's got to be. It can't be the remixed version. It's got to be
Okay.
the old pressing.
All right.
But JSB Records, it's a British blues label. They put out a Buddy Guy record called DJ Play My Blues or something like that. DJ Please Play These Blues.
Okay.
You know, forgive me, I might be screwing up the name.
I'll figure it out. So what's the name of the label one more time? Jazz what?
JSP, like the 3 letters.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that label.
Yeah, so that's got a track, at least one track, maybe a couple that are some of my favorites, but they digitized it. And when they put out the remixed version, they kind of made it all like modern, like they cleaned it up and they put reverb on it. But that original one has Phil Guy playing, you know, it sounds like Phil Guy through some kind of Fender amp. And then Buddy is just, it sounds like his Strat and a bassman turned all the way up. And it's the rawest in studio version of Buddy on a couple of things. And then, I don't know, it's just something about the remix. It doesn't have any oomph to it. So I need the original one.
Right, and that one was probably released on vinyl originally.
Definitely. It was like 1979 or something.
Okay, all right. I'm on it, man.
Oh, dude, you're my hero. If you find it, I'll buy it. As long as,
all right.
But I don't know what the prices have done on those, so we'll have to talk.
We'll talk, and then I'll let you know all that. That's one thing about Bebop. We don't get something then tell you what it costs. We tell you what it costs before we get it. You know?
Yeah, appreciate it very much, by the way.
Yeah.
So,
hey, man, thanks a lot. I love your show, and I've heard other interviews you've done, and they've been great. So keep doing what you're doing. I think you're doing a great thing.
Thanks, man. And we'll do it again soon.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm going to stop recording.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.